Thank you for listening to Shulchanaruchharav.com.
The kavanas intent that one is supposed to have upon dwelling in the sukkah, upon eating in the sukkah, upon fulfilling the mitzvah of Teshvu Shivas Yomim Ke'en Taturu inside the sukkah, what should be one's intent that he should have while fulfilling the mitzvah of God? So as a general rule in all the mitzvahs of the Torah, mitzvahs einen tzrichim kavana, meaning that although by a biblical command one must have intent that he's fulfilling the command, that he's doing the action of the command for the sake of fulfilling the command of God, and not that he's doing some playful activity, nonetheless there is no additional concentration and intent necessary for the fulfillment of the mitzvah. Meaning that even if you have no clue why you're doing this command, why God commanded you, what is its purpose, its function, its effect on the soul, the world, the higher spheres, nonetheless, the fact that you did the action of the command and you intended to do so to fulfill God's will, you fulfilled the mitzvah. And therefore, knowing the reasons and intents of the mitzvahs do not invalidate the mitzvah if you don't know them. However, the Bach points out that there's 3 exceptions to this rule, meaning that by 3 mitzvahs in the Torah, we find that having a general intent that I'm fulfilling God's command does not suffice, and one must also have the additional intent of the reason and purpose of the command. And writes the Bach in chapter 8 in Hilchas Tzitzis, and in chapter 625 in Hilchas Sukkah, that it's by the 3 mitzvahs of Tzitzis, Tefillin, and Sukkah. Why by these 3 commands must one also have in mind the reason behind them when one fulfills the mitzvah? As the verse explicitly states and stipulates that the fulfillment of the mitzvah is for the purpose of this reason. Tzitzis is for the purpose of remembering God's commands. Tefillin is for the purpose that it serves as an ice, as an omen between us and God. And by Sukkah the pasuk states that the purpose of the sukkah is in order so your generations know. So since the verse itself, scripture itself, makes the fulfillment of the mitzvah contingent for the purpose of its reason, therefore also when you fulfill it, you must have this in mind. And practically so is ruled in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch in chapter 625 halacha 1, that every person must have in mind when dwelling in the sukkah that he is dwelling in it in order to fulfill God's command to sit in a sukkah, which is generally required by all mitzvahs, and in commemoration of the reason behind the sukkah. Now comes the $1 million question. What is exactly the reason behind why God commanded us to dwell in the sukkah, of which we are to intend and have in mind each time we fulfill the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah? So we find in Talmud Tractate Sukkah, page 11b, a debate on this matter between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that the dwelling of the sukkah is in commemoration of the sukkahs that we built while we were during our travels of our 40 years in the desert. There was a time that we built sukkahs, temporary huts, and thereby now too we build a temporary huts. Rabbi Eliezer argues and says no, that it's in commemoration of the Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of glory that surrounded the Jewish people in the desert throughout their travels. Practically the Torah, the Mechaber, the Alter Rebbe, and the Shulchan Aruch all rule like the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, that God commanded us to dwell in the Sukkah in commemoration of the Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of glory, as the clouds of glory provided us shade from the heat and from the sun and from the rain, etc. Now, what's the practical ramification between whether you hold like Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi Eliezer regarding the reason behind the commemoration? So the Mefarshim explain that the practical ramification is exactly our subject. What should you intend on? What should you concentrate on when you're sitting in the sukkah throughout the 7 days? What reason are you here for? What should you be trying to fulfill? The Taz explains that according to Rabbi Akiva, the whole purpose is for the general remembrance of the Exodus. While according to Rabbi Eliezer, one is to concentrate and intend that he's doing so in order to remember the clouds of glory and all the miracles that it provided for us and the shade it provided for us, etc. Accordingly, it is quite puzzling that practically la halacha when the Alter Rebbe records in the Shulchan Aruch in 625.1 the exact intent of concentration, he writes, that one is to dwell in the sukkah throughout the 7 days with intent to fulfill God's command in commemoration of the Exodus, and doesn't mention the clouds of glory, meaning that in the beginning of his halacha, he rules like Rabbi Eliezer, the whole purpose of the mitzvah is for the sake of the cloud of glory. While in his conclusion he writes, like Rabbi Akiva, that the commemoration is for the sake of the Exodus. The Pri Megadim and other Mefarshim explain, based on this and other previous Paiskim, that in truth, in order to be Yaitz according to all opinions, one should have everything in mind. Meaning, when you're dwelling in the Sukkah throughout the 7 days of Sukkot, have in mind that you're doing so to remember the Exodus, as writes Rabbi Akiva. Have in mind that you're doing so to remember the clouds of glory, as is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, and have in mind to remember the general miracles and wonders that God performs for the Jewish people. While this is one approach of understanding in the Alter Rebbe's opinion, the Rebbe in Likutei Sichos takes a different approach in his conclusion and writes that according to the Alter Rebbe, remembering the Exodus covers all the opinions, and you don't have to have any specific intent about the Ananei HaKavod. So practically to summarize, throughout all the 7 days of dwelling in the Sukkah, especially when you say the bracha of Leishev Basukkah, one is to have in mind, have kavanah that he's doing so, aside for in general fulfilling the mitzvah of God, as well in order to remember the Exodus, and remember the miracles and wonders that God did for us, and according to some poskim, also in order to remember the clouds of glory. The Rebbe points out that it doesn't suffice to merely have a fleeting thought about this, but one should contemplate these points and try to re-experience it in his mind, the miracles that occurred. This intent is not meant for one to only have the first night he sits in the Sukkah, but every single day and every single meal that you're eating in the Sukkah, you should have this intent. Now, what's the halacha if one didn't have this intent? Does he fulfill the mitzvah of Leishev Basukkah? So according to the Bach, it seems that one simply does not fulfill the mitzvah, as the whole purpose is Laman Yedu Dereseichem, so you remember these things. If you didn't remember, you missed the whole point. It's as if you didn't do the mitzvah. However, other poskim rule that although this is an integral part of this mitzvah, the remembrance of the reason, nonetheless, from the letter of the law min adin, it's considered that the mitzvah was fulfilled even if you did not have this intent. Based on all the above, it is advised, and a good idea for the father of the home, or the leader of the table in the sukkah, to announce before Kiddush for everyone present to have this in mind and concentrate on this reason in order so the mitzvah is fulfilled properly and in its utmost way.
Thank you for listening to Shulchanaruchharav.com. Our free services of making Torah knowledge available to the public depends on donors like you. Please help us continue our work through making even a small contribution at Shulchanaruchharav.com under the Daily Halacha Dedication section or in the subscription page. Also, check out our online courses and many sefarim available for purchase that will both enhance your Torah knowledge and help support our work.